Graham, scene one, slate one, take one.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in the theatre scene, particularly because I was interested in the arts in general. I suppose I was a kind of amateur artist, loved to paint and draw, but basically I was reading a lot about, I suppose, literature, theatre, and so on. I was very interested in theatre. But my studies took me in another direction. I think to me the space was like another oasis of normality for me, given the state of South Africa of the time. I come from I suppose a community, or from a school, a high school that is very, it's called Trafalgar High School, and most of my teachers were very active politically, and they instilled in us a sense of the world that is very different or subversive to what was then the apartheid system. So I never really conformed to the system. And I always had in my own mind, in my own sort of imagination, a world of normality that was very different from what was then the conditions of living under apartheid. I lived in the Bo-Kaap, which was not specifically, in terms of the apartheid legislation, a township dedicated towards a particular ethnic group, but it was mainly a kind of mixed Christian Anglican community of mixed race, so-called mixed race people. And at my school, I suppose and through my reading and through, I suppose, conversation with my teachers, I lived a different life in my imagination and in, I suppose, the possibilities that I saw as that went beyond the way apartheid and the apartheid system was trying to, make us live our lives. And so the space theatre was another oasis of normality to me. It was something other than the norm being apartheid South Africa. Well, it was, I was also very involved in films and was part of a alternative film club called the New World Film Society that was showing a lot of alternative, I suppose, movies that the public in South Africa didn't really see. So I was very aware of all the alternatives out there, and I suppose finding a way around the censorship system in a way to get access to books, to movies, and the theatre, or at least a space theatre, and to some extent a little theatre at the University of Cape Town, but particularly space theatre was another arena of normality, as far as I'm concerned. So just normal people engaged in having access to culture, engaged in the arts, and I suppose just living their lives and enjoying the I suppose the fruits of human achievement in a way through theatre and so on. Well, I suppose everything about one's being was, there was always an attempt to direct you to live your life in a particular way, to conform to the system. And every choice you made in your daily life, whether to go to a particular school, what school you went to, what train or bus you catch, had to do with the apartheid system. In a way, you have to decide, should I conform? Should I do it out of necessity, simply because I want to go to school, or I want to take a train from A to B, and therefore I have to be in a segregated carriage in a train? So you make those judgments, make those decisions all the time. And so it was just very much part of one's life. So there are certain oases like the theatre, the space theatre, like New World Film Society and various other activities I was involved in, that took me outside of the norm, Yeah, that was a line of least resistance in a way. It's, you know, you just lived your life. You followed orders. You did what everyone else did. I don't know what happened to me and why I lived a fairly non-conformist life. You know, perhaps the role of my teachers, perhaps it's to do with my own family life. Perhaps it's to do with the fact that I spent a lot of time in the public library reading books. My mother was a domestic worker, and my parents were divorced early on. So I had a lot. My life was in the street. But at some time, I think the first year when I was at school, at the end of the first year, I got a book prize. Maybe that triggered my love for reading. So I spent a lot of my time, primary school, high school, reading, being in the library. I suppose imagining other worlds through what I was reading. And maybe that helped me cope with the reality. I mean, I remember the first time I was confronted with the reality of apartheid South Africa was in, I think it was 1960 or 61, with after the Sharpeville massacre. I didn't even know there was a Sharpeville massacre. I was still probably in second year of primary school or first year of primary school. And I knew something was happening. And I saw in the streets along in Bloom Street and Buitengracht Street, I saw police beating people coming from work, just lunchtime. And they were not demonstrating, they were just ordinary people coming home to have spent an hour at home in their lunch, during their lunch break, and the police were beating them. And so from that moment on, probably 1961, I felt a sense of unease about the situation. I became much more, I suppose, politically aware of things in South Africa that were wrong. Well, I was at school. I didn't show it actively in demonstrating. It's only when I was at university, I suppose, when we were more actively involved in making decisions like that. But in my school, there was I suppose, a political ethos that was subversive to the system in a way. Our teachers were teaching us other things. Well, it was the Sizwe Banzi, The Island, those early plays, that really struck me. Well, I mean, I suppose, given the South African condition where everyone was living in their own ghettos, in their own particular communities, Sizwe Banzi was such a visceral, direct, in-your-face confrontation with a reality that you probably didn't experience before, but it was like thrust upon you by being a member of the audience. And in a sense, it didn't really make me realign my political attachment to my political orientation, because I was already quite receptive to those possibilities, but it just made it much more real to me. It made something in the experience, that sharpened, I suppose, one's kind of emotional responses to the situation. Well, I suppose I knew that, I suppose, the armed struggle and issues of violence was always there, ever present, that if one struggles for an alternative, the possibility of violence was always there, and then the possibility of you having to make those kind of choices was there. I never made those choices. My orientation has always been to engage in the kind of cultural, kind of political, theoretical way, although there were moments when clearly, I realized that those were the possibilities, but I never took those choices. Cape Town, it's a very strange community in a sense, and the apartheid Cape Town, and probably still that legacy still continues today. People are generally quite locationized, each one in their own special community. The space was one of those arenas that actually removed all those barriers, those people who were able to come or get to the space. And the space in itself was, I suppose, like a place where a whole range of people gathered without, the ghost of and the kind of apartheid, being ever present. It's all ever present in people's minds still today. But I suppose within the space there was an opportunity to maybe temporary, maybe in the moment of being there, forget about the what's happening outside of the space. The space itself was clearly an intervention in that whole social setup. So in that sense, people gravitated towards it because they sensed that there's something alternative, something new, something different. Well, I'm not aware of that. Principally because, I suppose, not me, because I lived around or near the space, but there were occasions when I was not living in the city itself. So if you go to the theatre at night, you rush home. After the theatre, there's no time, because usually you have to travel quite a distance. I mean, there's one moment, I've been trying to remember the play I saw at the space, and I was rushing home, and I had a program note in my bag, and I was accosted by the police, and I had other books in my bag. Eventually, I spent 5 hours at the security police station, at the police station, waiting for the security police to interrogate me. I've been trying to rack my brains what exactly. It was the program of the play, possibly, with some lyrics. It may have been. That's what I was asking Brian if they did that play by on the assassination of Jean Paul Marat, but they didn't. That had the word revolution or the word whatever in the program note, and the police saw that, and they immediately took me to the police. I spent 5 hours at Caledon Square with my partner, and we had a few books with us, and we had to justify what we had, but it was prompted by the program note. Awatsi Island and Sizwe Banzi is dead. I suppose it was graphic and visceral starkness of that experience that just grabbed you at the throat, and I don't know what it was for a kind of wide audience to experience that. But clearly, for anyone, it was a human experience. It was a human, I suppose, experience of a particular enactment of a particular set of experiences that really grabbed me. So I think I probably saw it at least 2 times. I think I saw it at the Island and Sizwe Banzi. I think was performed at UCT as well, so I saw it again there as well. So and maybe a couple of years later, I saw it again in the future, later when it was performed. So it was really those early plays. It was in the early 70s that, in a sense, anticipated quite a lot of in terms of not, I suppose, in terms of just the political mood, it created a set of conditions, I would imagine, that not only for a white audience, but also for, I suppose, it was reflective of a black experience, of a black awakening, a black, I suppose, I mean, I became a trade unionist in the 80s, and I was very involved in the political struggle, but mainly as a trade union activist, and also in the cultural arena. And so I could see that from those early experiences of the early 70s, there was a particular phase in the South African struggle that eventually led to, well, there was 76. And 76, I was at the high school, and I also got caught up in the movements and events of 76. I was at the space fairly regularly from probably the early 70s, right into the 80s, early, sort of. I remember the other space venue. I was in Cape Town at that time, but I left Cape Town in, I think, 87. I suppose the period probably from about 74, 73, 74, 75, 76, I was quite active politically in others. So I probably didn't go to many of the plays then. But I remember I was a friend of Fatima Dike, who I remember she was doing a play. She was working with Dimitri. I discovered through Shelley, knowing Shelley. And she was busy working on her first play for the space, and I spent many hours with her talking about the early drafts of her play. But I'm not sure. I cannot remember seeing the end game. It was a sacrifice of Crowley. I spent lots of time with. Well, I suppose if you're an audience member, you open yourself up to a set of experiences. So in a way, you enter an arena. You're receptive of, or you try to be receptive of what the play is, offering you, and you engage with it in some way. I suppose in South Africa at that time, it was much more than that. I go to theatre in London occasionally, and it doesn't have the same resonance to me, because in a way the space, or going to the space theatre, was also a political statement. The audience was not just simply an audience. It was not just simply an audience like any other audience. It was people who came to the space knowing that the space is, in a sense, an alternative arena. It went against the grain of the society in which you're living. So just merely by going to it, you were not just simply going to a theatre. You're actually also making your own statement of going to a place where what you may receive, and is clearly your own statement against the grain of what you experience in daily life in being in South Africa. It has to do with a moment. It has to do what kind of intervention in the moment, a particular space, a theatre, how it inserts itself. It's how it inserts itself in the moment of time, and also in the space, in the location. And for some reason, the whole combination of circumstances was such that the space was more than just a theatre, more than just a local theatre that you go to get entertained or get access to. I suppose we were colonials, in South Africa, mainly seeing European theatre, or at least theatre in the European tradition. So in that sense, we yeah, I mean, we were engaging in another world outside of our particular, location in the world itself. But also, it was very much a political statement. I think most people who went to the theatre, went to the space theatre, especially in the beginnings, were also making their own statement. They were also asserting their own right just to be normal in an abnormal society. You know?